Chapter 9. Colonel Drake pondered deeply on how he could rectify the injustice inflicted upon Thorn. His thoughts were interrupted when the express halted at a station 30 miles away from Drakeville. George Thorn, the son of James Thorn, and the superintendent of the Drakeville Iron and Steel Coaters plant, entered his car. Someone, possibly Laura, had telegraphed George Thorn about Colonel Drake's return train. George Thorn was visibly moved as he shook hands with Evander Drake and inquired about his health and family. Drake urged George Thorn to update him on the strike, its current state, and what the municipal authorities were doing to safeguard the company's property. George Thorn briefed him on the situation up to his departure from Drakeville. He mentioned how the manager and the company's general counsel, Mr. Webster, had tried persuading the Workingmen's Committee with every possible argument. They had even submitted a statement that showed the company had made very little or no profit from recent contracts that were now being completed. However, all efforts to reach a satisfactory agreement with the employees had been in vain. Since dawn, 4,000 men had been parading the streets with music and clubs, forcing employees of other establishments to quit work and threatening to destroy the steel plant. As Colonel Drake listened, his face turned red with anger. Thorn watched his employer's emotions, not daring to offer any suggestions as he sympathized with the employees who saw him as their friend. Colonel Drake was a robust man with a wide forehead, overhanging brows, broad chest and shoulders, short, thick neck, and strong arms developed at the anvil. Thorn had studied him since boyhood, but he had never seen his employer so incensed. Upon arriving at Drakeville, the wealthy ironmaster and his superintendent drove to the general offices of the Drakeville Iron and Steel Company. The directors of the company were in a special session to find ways of protecting their threatened property and crushing the strike. B.C. Wilson, the manager, rose to greet Colonel Drake, who shook hands with him and the directors. Drake then chaired the meeting, quickly grasping the situation and approving of all that his directors and manager had done. Standing up with conviction, he addressed his board in a strong voice. "Gentlemen, you may be aware of my stance on the issue at hand. 4 years ago we faced a similar problem that we failed to address decisively, leading to prolonged discontent among our employees. Their intentions remain clear today, to either rule or ruin our massive enterprise. Capital and labor should be allies, but unfortunately, both trusts and labor organizations are equally greedy and self-centered. Centuries ago in Belgium, weavers forced capital to accept their terms and even threw wealthy individuals off balconies to their death. This unnatural revolution didn't last long as intelligence and wealth regained control, and always will. Allowing our employees to determine their own wages and have a say in our company's decisions would cloud or mortgage our capital. It's an unreasonable demand. Why should they expect us to share our property, which the United States has guaranteed us? If our state or national government cannot or will not protect our property, on which they levy taxes annually, then we'll seek refuge under a flag that can and will provide ample protection. This uncertainty regarding titles and values in the United States will eventually destroy the Republic." As the owner of 5/6 of the company's stock, it was no surprise that the directors supported Colonel Drake's words. He then requested Mr. Webster, their general counsel, to read the company's proposed position to the board. Mr. Webster, a tall, elderly man who had served on the state's Supreme Bench for 5 years, was a man of few words but well versed in the country's laws, particularly corporation laws. Holding a sheet of paper, he read, "The Drakeville Iron and Steel Company asserts its fundamental right to manage its business in its way, following and protected by the laws of the land." The board approved the attorney's position and decided to draft a petition immediately to send to the city's mayor, requesting protection for their property. The meeting adjourned, and Colonel Drake, his manager, and Mr. Webster rushed to the mayor's office, while Superintendent George Thorn headed back to the steelworks to carry out his orders, even though he didn't believe in harsh measures. The mayor quickly reviewed the petition when Colonel Drake presented it to him. Bands of music could be heard on the street, and a long procession of workers carrying national flags was marching towards the city hall. Citizens held their breath on the streets, and police officers feared the outcome. Colonel Drake was about to leave when the mayor grabbed his arm and said, "No, You and your colleagues must stay here and meet with a committee of your employees who have a meeting with me at 3 o'clock. I have already spoken to Colonel Drake and urged him to maintain peace and protect property. I ask the same of you and your fellow workers. Violence and destruction will not solve anything. As for the issue of wages, I suggest that you continue to negotiate with the company in a peaceful and respectful manner. I will do what I can to facilitate these discussions and find a resolution that is fair to all parties involved. Let us work together for the good of our city and its people." The committee members nodded, but their faces showed skepticism and disappointment. They had hoped for a more forceful response from the mayor, but they knew that violence would only make things worse. They left the office, followed by the throng of workers outside. The situation was tense, but for the moment it seemed that peace would prevail. "Gentlemen of the committee, allow me to introduce Colonel Drake, your esteemed employer." Memories of his wife and 3 young children at home, relying on his earnings from the forge for their daily bread, softened Colonel Drake's voice as he spoke kindly but briefly to the committee. He reiterated what his manager had already communicated earlier that day at 10 o'clock. The current poor state of the steel market made it impossible for the company to grant the requested wage increase. Despite the committee's knowledge of the company's past profits, they left sullenly. Once the decision was conveyed to the anxious workers below, the employees of the Drakeville Iron and Steel Company slowly made their way back to their homes. The mayor ordered his chief of police to immediately dispatch 50 men in patrol wagons to the steelworks to guard the property and maintain peace. After the committee's departure, the mayor turned to Colonel Drake and asked, "What do you think will happen now?" "Mr. Mayor, we cannot predict the actions of workingmen in their lodges. Often a few agitators and the so-called walking delegate hold despotic power over the members. If a worker with a large family suggests peaceful measures, an agitator may rise up in indignation and demand the traitor be expelled. This stifles freedom of action in many labor unions, so what appears to be unanimous action is actually the exercise of power by a few who have nothing to lose and whose salary is paid from the meager wages of honest labor. Those who talk the most often think the least," continued Colonel Drake. "The greatest need in most labor organizations today is wise leadership, which will result when the best elements in the lodges assert themselves. The despotism of ill-advised labor is more dangerous to civilization than the reign of intelligent capital. This is especially true in the United States, where wise laws prevent the entailing of wealth, and most large fortunes soon disappear among the heirs." Colonel Drake used a simple analogy to illustrate the relationship between capital and labor. A pair of shears. Capital is one blade, labor is the other, and both are useless without the rivet that holds them together. Confidence is the rivet that binds capital and labor together. The key to success in the business world today is full and lasting confidence between the two. With that, Colonel Drake and his companions bid farewell to the mayor and returned to their homes. After visiting Niagara Falls, Mr. Lee and his group traveled to Drakeville, where Mrs. Eastlake met up with some friends and continued her journey to the Pacific coast. Colonel Drake greeted his daughter and Mr. Christopher Lee at the station, though he was not pleased to see the latter. The automobile swiftly transported them to the stunning abode of Evander Drake, which boasted a view of Drakeville and the cerulean waters of Lake Erie. Following their meal, Colonel Drake expounded upon the untimely strike and the impossibility of predicting when the steel plant would recommence operation. Mr. Lee determined that he would embark on a brief excursion through Drakeville the following morning before continuing his travels throughout the United States and potentially Australia, where he had pressing business on behalf of a London-based client. It was also arranged that he would return to London via Drakeville in approximately 6 months, should Colonel Drake so desire, or else complete his circumnavigation of the globe, returning to England by way of the Suez Canal.